Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to GiFT2013, the Global Issues Forum for tomorrow. My name's Warren Pohl. Today we've got 6 speakers and 2 sessions each. What we really want to emphasize today is that it's going to be an interactive event. We really welcome your questions. Those in the audience have 2 options, either to write your questions down or and hand them to our staff, or you can actually tweet them using the hashtag HU_gift. That's HU_gift. So let us begin. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to GiFT. I'm Ichiro Ueda, Vice President of Hokkaido University. GiFT stands for Global Issues Forum for Tomorrow, an event that was inaugurated in 2011 and now in its 3rd year. It's one of the flagship events of Sustainability Weeks, an event we have hosted in 2007. The Sustainability Weeks is part of Hokkaido University's annual social contributions to help create a sustainable society. We host a variety of events, research meetings, contests, exhibitions and public lectures over a few weeks in autumn. 13 will feature 39 events and provide a platform for intensive talks on how we can work to create a brighter future. Today's world has a variety of problems to be addressed. These are intricately interconnected. I believe education needs to equip people with these 3 key attributes to solve these complicated problems. First, frontier spirits to lead the way forward to a new era. Second, expertise. And lastly, extrapolations that's support ability to take actions toward creating solutions. Hokkaido University makes constant effort to develop future leaders equipped with these attributes. These are our motives for holding GiFT, an event designed to guide prospective leaders who are now high school and undergraduate students in choosing a field of specialization and research themes so that we can engage in collaboration with us in the future to create a better world. Today, 6 young researchers equipped with these 3 key attributes will talk about current and future challenges facing the world and invite you to join their research. The first 3 will talk and discuss topics in the field of water management. They will also clarify key points in solutions to to current and future challenges facing our planet's most vital resource. After the break, another 3 speakers will discuss issues relating to Japanese society. I believe their case studies in Japan can also provide significant insights and wisdom to other countries and regions in the world. This year, we really want you, the audience, to engage in these events by posting questions on Twitter using hashtag #HU_gift, or writing your questions down on forms provided. This is, after all, a forum for everyone to engage. Ladies and gentlemen, let us begin.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, or should I say boys and girls. It's my great pleasure to introduce my research area. Today, I'd like to talk about the global water issue, water shortage, and how membrane technology can save the world. First of all, I'd like to briefly explain what the membrane is like. Membrane that we use for water treatment or wastewater treatment is very similar to filter paper you used to use in experiment in your junior high school or elementary school. But the membrane that we use for water treatment or wastewater treatment is much tighter and much stronger. When we look at the surface of membrane with a large magnification, you see the numerous numbers of tiny pores. And the principle of membrane separation is very simple. When you apply some driving force across membranes, such as pressure difference, small constituent that is smaller than the tiny pores will penetrate into the permeable side, whereas the large constituent that is larger than the micropores will be certainly retained. That's it. However, the size of the tiny pores is incredibly small, say less than 0.1 micrometers. So we can very easily obtain very clear water with this simple operation. When we see the market nowadays, we can see the variety of the membranes. I think you can very easily imagine these types of the flat sheet membranes, but we also have string-shaped membranes like this. We call this hollow fiber membrane. This membrane is advantageous in terms of the specific surface area. We often use some organic polymers to produce these membranes. However, recently, inorganic ceramic membranes has also become popular. And as you can guess, structures of the membranes will certainly affect the membrane performance. Here you can see the cross-section image of the membrane and the surface structure of the membrane. And one important topic here is that we have not optimized the structures of the membranes. Nowadays, we can control the internal and the surface structure of the membranes, but we don't have any consensus, optimal structures of it. Additionally, we don't have any consensus about the optimal material for the production of membranes. We don't know which is better, organic membranes or inorganic membranes. So my point is, now still, production of membranes is a big frontier for researchers. Okay, so let me get back to the main story. As you have heard, well, this century is called the century of water. Why? Now we are facing the serious water shortage. You may not feel it if you live in a water-rich country such as Japan. However, water shortage is really serious and now is recognized by the world leaders. You probably know the annual Davos meeting where world leaders get together and discuss important issues. And in the recent Davos meetings, global water shortage has been a very important topic. And in this year's Davos meetings, it was said that water scarcity is the second most important world risk. And some people caution that even a war may be caused by water shortage. And here you can see the water scarcity index prepared by United Nations. In this slide, dark color indicates the area where they are suffering from serious water shortage. As you can see, water shortage is really serious all over the world. And we sometimes often forget the importance of water. We cannot imagine our life without water. And also, we need a huge amount of water for industry and agriculture. Unfortunately, however, there is no replacement for water. So, according to one pessimistic expectation, water may become more valuable than oils in the near future. So, understandably, we need to do something to address this global water shortage. And one viable option would be wastewater reclamation, particularly wastewater reclamation and reuse aided by membrane technology. So that's why I would say membrane can save the world. And one extreme and advanced example of wastewater reclamation and reuse aided by membrane technology is seen in Singapore, where they are suffering from serious water shortage. They are trying to use wastewater effluent as a part of drinking water source. Well, to make the wastewater drinkable, of course, they need to use very advanced technology. Membrane can do that. And the wastewater treated by membrane is called their new water. And this terminology is very important terminology among the researchers. Everybody knows it. And well, this new water is very important concept, and the membrane is the key technology for the production of new water. And now, when it comes to the membrane, Japan is very strong. In the membrane market, Japanese companies are dominant, and even in Singapore, they use Japanese membranes. And Hokkaido University is one of the most important research institute for the membrane technology. But here I need to confess, well, at present, wastewater reclamation using membranes has not become common. Why? Well, there is a problem in this technology, and this problem is actually my research topic, as I will explain later. Well, when it comes to the application of membrane to the wastewater treatment, technology called membrane bioreactor, or MBR, is very promising technology. It has been drawing a lot of attention. And many researchers, including me, believe that this technology will be the mainstream technology in the near future. And I think MBR can change the wastewater management system and eventually save the world. So from now, let me briefly explain what is the currently working wastewater management system. Well, now we are using the centralized system. And here in the centralized system, we installed a big, large-scale wastewater treatment plant, and this large-scale wastewater treatment plant collects a huge amount of wastewater by using very complicated, large-scale wastewater collection network. And then it will discharge treated water into one point. This is the currently working wastewater management system. And as a result of using this centralized system, as we are seeing in the real world, wastewater reclamation and reuse is not common. Why? Well, mainly because distance between demand and supply is widely separated. Treated wastewater is only available in the area that is close to the wastewater treatment plant. And additionally, I would say the quality of the treated water is not high enough. So application of the treated wastewater is rather limited at present. Then what would happen if we can change this centralized system into decentralized system? Each small community has their own treatment facility, and the quality of the treated water is very high. For example, that might be comparable to the drinking water. Then there is no reason to hesitate to use treated water. It is free. Then wastewater reclamation and reuse will be facilitated. So by this centralized system, we can have the decentralized system. Now, question is, what kind of technology is necessary or suitable for this decentralized system? Treatment technology should be very compact, and it should be easy to operate. Automation is desirable, and it should produce the very high quality of treated water. MBR can perfectly meet these criteria. So by using MBR, we can have decentralized system, and we can promote wastewater reuse, and we can mitigate water shortage. Let me point out one additional advantage of this decentralized system. Well, with this kind of decentralized system, transportation of water is much cheaper and easier because the size of the wastewater collection system is very small. This means the installation of the decentralized system can be very short. This is a very important aspect for the developing countries where they need to quickly improve sanitary conditions. They cannot wait for a long time to install large-scale, complicated, centralized system. But by using this kind of decentralized system, we can quickly install the wastewater management system, and we can quickly improve sanitary conditions in developing countries. So by using MBR and the decentralized system, we can improve the sanitary condition, and well, in this sense as well, we can save the world. In spite of the advantages I have just described, well, I need to say the use of MBR has been still limited, and decentralized wastewater management systems are still in the minority. Why? There is a problem in this technology. As you can imagine, probably, in the long-term operation of a membrane process, including MBR, some component will accumulate on and in membranes, and permeability of membrane will be reduced. This phenomena is membrane fouling. Membrane fouling will increase both operational and initial costs. So this limits the wide application of membrane technology. So for widespread use of MBR technologies, we need to address this problem caused by membrane fouling, and therefore, understandably, membrane fouling is very important and hot research topic. To control membrane fouling, we need to know what fouls membrane. Many researchers have investigated this topic, and we have a kind of consensus that, well, when it comes to the membrane fouling in MBR, some polysaccharides or proteins are the major players in membrane fouling. But there is very limited information on detailed features of polysaccharides or proteins. We don't know what types of proteins or polysaccharides are involved in the membrane fouling in MBR. So this is a problem. And, well, when it comes to the analysis of proteins or polysaccharides causing membrane fouling in MBR, I think Hokkaido University is one of the leading research institutes. One big advantage, or I would say one beautiful thing in Hokkaido, working for Hokkaido University, is that this university is a very big university. So I could find researchers who are really good at analysis of polysaccharides or protein. And we did a kind of collaboration, and with the help of these professors, we could reveal the detailed information of polysaccharides or proteins causing membrane fouling in MBR. Well, I think this is probably the first report in the world. And I think by accumulating this kind of very detailed information on polysaccharides or proteins causing membrane fouling in MBRs, we will be able to develop new method to control membrane fouling in the future, and we can promote the widespread use of membrane technology. So, as I have described, membrane can save the world, I think, by mitigating water shortage and improving sanitary conditions in developing countries. Well, this research area is very competitive, but I think it's very exciting to compete with the researchers from all over the world. So I highly encourage you to join us and do research together, and let's save the world. That's it. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Today, I would like to talk to you about the ocean. The ocean that we all know, the ocean that we all love, and the ocean that, through our actions, is becoming endangered. Not just the ocean, but the life that lives there, and that we may be losing at a very fast rate. So what's the trouble with the oceans, and what are we doing concerning that? If all the world were paper and all the sea were ink, if all the trees were bread and cheese, what would we do for a drink? This is just from a child's bedtime song, but it tells you how important oceans are for us. And water is the most, together with air, is the most important component of Earth. Oceans occupy over 70% of Earth's surface and hold over 95% of all the water that exists in the world. And we just had a very nice talk about water. And we know how important it is, water. Oceans were the birthplace of life. Oceans today hold, at least we know about, over 230,000 species, and we think that there may be 2 million or more. Oceans produced, not oceans, but tiny organisms that live in the oceans, produced most of the oxygen that we breathe, and today they continue keeping that supply going on. And we all know that without that, life on Earth wouldn't be possible. Oceans regulate our climates. You know, if you live near the sea or the ocean, you see that the climate is more moderate. You don't have, so cold winters or so hot summers. But also, waters of the ocean carry from the tropics heat towards colder regions. For example, the Gulf Stream on the Northern Atlantic, we consider that the heat carried by the Gulf Stream from the polar area, from the tropical areas towards the polar areas are probably one of the responsibles for the development of our civilization. And of course, economy. We all love nature, but we usually think more about ourselves. That's okay. So oceans are transportation means, oceans are communication means, oceans are sources of food. Indeed, 1 out of 7 people that live on the world would not be able to live without the sources we collect from the ocean. Now, what's going on with the oceans? I told you at the beginning they are being troubled, endangered by our actions. I'm using a very simple model so we all understand. Oceans are becoming like vinegar, and we all know what is vinegar. We use it in our kitchens for sauces and things like that. How is it going How is it happening? CO2, we all have heard about CO2, we read about CO2 on newspapers, and we see that on TV and radio. CO2 is going out from our cars, our houses, our industries, our planes, our ships, and accumulates in the atmosphere. Then dissolves in the water of the ocean, and by combining with that water, becomes an acid, becomes the so-called carbonic acid. And this acid is acting with carbonate. Our bones, for example, are made of calcium carbonate. Most of bones, shells of the animals, spines of sea urchins, etc., are made of calcium carbonate. So this acts with it and starts dissolving. Let's just give you a little example of what is happening to the animals in the sea. Maybe some of you did it at school. I did it when I was your age. But if you didn't, you can get home and do it. Just use some of the vinegar you have it on a glass, for example, and drop some eggshell. You can also do that with a small bone. And we'll see, if you leave it for a certain time on the vinegar, you see that the eggshell starts to become very fragile. If you could see it under the microscope, you'll see that small holes appear on it. And step by step, those small holes increase. And with time, the eggshell will just dissolve in the vinegar. Exactly the same is happening with animal bones and spines and skeletons and shells in the ocean. Now, is science doing something about it? Is society and governments doing something about it? We first knew about it, and when I talk about we, I mean science, around the year 2000, when, because of the CO2 accumulating in the atmosphere, governments were thinking of, well, maybe we can just dump it into the ocean and get rid of it. And then scientists started doing experiments. They started enriching seawater in laboratories with CO2 and looking what happened to those animals and plants that lived in there. And they noticed that skeletons started to dissolve, reproduction started to, be late or be stopped even, growth started to decrease. And that's when all of this question about the so-called ocean acidification started to come on. People like me, here at Hokkaido and in many other places, we work with sea animals. In this case, it's bryozoan, kokemushi in Japanese. It's an animal, a colony, that looks like a plant, as you see there. It has a skeleton made out of calcium carbonate, exactly like my skeleton, exactly like your skeleton, exactly like the eggshell. So what I do is that I put these animals in the lab, in bottles enriched with CO2, and I see what happens to their growth. And what happens to their growth is that with time, growth decreases and even stops. And what about the skeleton? Well, the above picture is a normal skeleton. And you look at what happens to the below picture. Skeleton starts to dissolve. But reproduction also stops in many cases, and physiology and a few others. These are just the more evident results that we are obtaining. The other thing that we do is that we use collections. Whenever you go to a museum and you see a beautiful exhibit there, think that that material of the exhibit is used by scientists to compare what was before, because those collections may maybe have 100 years or 200 years, sometimes more. So you can compare those animals, those plants with what you have today. And you can see those changes happening. Let's talk a little about Japan. We are here in Sapporo, beautiful city. Well, Japanese waters, oceans surrounding Japanese islands, hold almost 15% of all the diversity in the oceans. This makes up a little over of 33,000 species that are here. So it's a big responsibility. Now, is Japanese society, Japanese government doing something about oceans acidification? Yes, it is. Quite a lot, as a matter of fact. One of the things that you can have access to it and you can see the state of the art, so to speak, of ocean acidification. It's this Japanese Meteorological Society website, which records all the progress of ocean acidification, not just surrounding Japan, but also in other parts of the world. Graphs like this, for example, you can see there. For example, you see that one way we measure ocean acidification is through the so-called pH. And pH varies between 1 and 14, being that 1 is the most acidic and 14 is not acidic at all. So if you look there, you have the pH, and you have years from 1980 through 2010. And you see those graphs, you see how pH is decreasing, which means if pH is decreasing, acidity is increasing. Remember, as low pH, as higher acidity. And then on your left side, you have also a transect of the Key Peninsula. In the Key Peninsula, on the last 26 years of measurements, we noticed that acidification had increased by 0.04. Well, you say, well, 0.04 is nothing. It is something, because during the last 200 years, acidity increased by 0.1. Now, make the math, make the calculations. 200 years, 0.1. 26 years, 0.04. In the next 200 years, the acidification will be much higher than had been on the last 200 years. And that's one of the biggest problems, is the speed at which it goes. And that's why we think, and we are sure, as a matter of fact, that it's human action that is doing that. That's exactly. Another program that the Japanese government has and that I'm working on and is several projects, big projects, working on animals and plants, and also developing tools. We need better tools in order to know better what is going on in the ocean. Searching for solutions. The Kyoto Protocol, I'm sure you all heard of it. It went in action in 2005. It will expire this year, and there is no replacement. Governments in the world had not become to a solution to replace the Kyoto Protocol. Well, maybe Japanese society, that was one of the initiatives of the Kyoto Protocol, maybe can take the lead, and maybe should take the lead about this. And it's really important to have a replacement. Now, what about us? You know, the ones that are here, the ones that will maybe listen to this, or are, you know, noticing about through Twitter and other mechanisms. Can we do something? Yes, we can. We can always do something. First of all, we can use better the resources of the ocean. Second, maybe we can use bikes and walk instead of using the car, so it has less CO2 going to the atmosphere. Maybe we can heat a little less our houses. No, I also like to be comfortable at home. But still, think about all the CO2. Think that we are the future, and the ocean is here, was here, and we want it to be continuing here for the future generations. If we want to save it, all of us need to have our little grain of sand in order to have a big beach. In this case, a little drop of water in order to have a healthy ocean and all the life that lives in it. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to my talk. And today I'd like to share some of my thoughts on how the scientists in my field can contribute to addressing issues concerning conservation of biodiversity, especially in river systems. Okay. As we all know by today, we are facing the fastest rate of species extinction at the global scale in modern society, modern history. And the freshwater ecosystems, including rivers, are one of the most endangered types of ecosystems on the planet. Okay, this figure came from the US, and as you can see, a greater proportion of species are facing a risk of extinction compared to other types of ecosystems, such as terrestrial ecosystems, right? The reason is very simple. Okay, you can think of why the rivers are more sensitive to the human activities. They accumulate and they receive most of the impacts of our influences from the human activities that take place in upstream catchment areas, right? And Japan is also under a great threat of biodiversity loss, and particularly because we have a high population density in such a small country at the global scale. So it is a great challenge for us to strike a good balance between the need of protecting nature and the need for development of land and also the prevention of disasters, right? So in this context, I am committed as a scientist to address 3 critical questions, right? So first, we need to know why and how species diversity or endangered species matter to us. The answer to this question would provide us a good logical reasons to invest money and time for protecting them. Secondly, we also need to know the root causes of environmental degradation. So with the knowledge about what is causing degradation, the managers or we can do a better job to come up with ways to fix the problems effectively and efficiently. Right. And third, we also need to know where the remaining important ecological functions exist in our society, world. Right? Ecological functions refers to the processes that are important in maintaining populations of particular species. That's what I mean here. Right? With this information, we can prioritize sites or locations that need to be conserved or protected with high priority. So we can do a better job in our conservation or protection of nature. Right. So, I'm sorry. So this is how we do our research. I'll just give you time. Right. So reading rivers, by which I mean understanding rivers, okay, through the field-based observations. That requires us to feel what the target organisms feel, or to see what the target organisms to see. That way we can better understand how the system works. Okay? And we also use almost anything that we believe would help us to read rivers, including not only fish. We also look at the bugs, insects, and plants, sediment, soil, and so on. And also a variety of knowledge from different disciplines, including biology, geomorphology, hydrology, hydraulics, will be very useful when reading rivers. So now I'd like to introduce some research results briefly, corresponding to one of each of my critical questions. So firstly, I and my colleagues tried to evaluate the cultural benefits provided by rivers. So what we did is we counted the number of people visiting rivers for different purposes. Okay? And at the same time, we counted number of species of fish in each river. We surveyed almost all large river systems across our country, which was more than 100. And what we found is that in rivers where we see higher species richness of fish, there are more people using those places for different recreational purposes, such as fishing or for just having fun. Okay? What this tells us is that there's a chance that if we lose a species richness, then there's a risk that we're going to lose some cultural benefits we receive from river systems. Right. So talking about the second example, this is about freshwater mussels. These mussels are one of the most endangered groups of organisms on the planet for many reasons. And the managers and we are very much concerned about how we can protect their habitat and how we can restore their habitat. But unfortunately, throughout the world, including Japan, their habitat is shrinking substantially. And this is the one of the typical habitat in Japan. What do you think about this river? Well, it has a green vegetation along water course, and the water quality is not very bad, but the habitat is shrinking. Well, we try to find out what's going on in this river, and we had to go back to the condition in the past. So we have to look back the past condition to find out what was wrong with this river. So over the period of about 30 or 40 years, the landscape level appearance changed substantially. Okay. Basically, we have more vegetation now compared to the past condition, which may sound good to you, but it's not. Right. The other way of looking at reading this river was looking at the topography of riverbed, okay, which cannot be easily seen from the ground. You have to go under the water. And what we found is there's an unusual rate of erosion going on underwater, which cannot be explained by any natural processes. Okay. And this was about like 20 meters deep, which cannot happen in nature. So then putting all this information together, we came up with the conceptual model and also the scientific rigorous analysis. We concluded that construction of dams and also the extraction of sediments from river channel in upstream area was the main cause of the ecosystem degradation in downstream areas. Right. So with this kind of information, we and river managers now at least know what is causing the degradation. So there's a clue for what they can do to restore or conserve or protect their habitat. Right. So third example, this is about commercially valuable species, salmon. Right. This is the life history of this salmon. Okay. They hatch from the egg in rivers, and then they migrate down to the ocean. And after spending several years in the ocean, they come back to lay their eggs again. This is their life cycle. Incubation period of eggs is critical for their life cycle. And water environment, having a particular temperature, is critical for their successful development. Right. So by the end of this, by doing this research, what we found is simply saying there's a places where we receive a lot of, they receive a lot of influences from groundwater coming up from the riverbed, right? So this is where we did survey. Toyohiro River, you're familiar with this. And the Toyohiro River flows through the center of our Sapporo city, where nearly 2 million people live. So you can imagine how much human influences this river can receive. But amazingly, in some locations, this river is still receiving a substantial amount of groundwater recharge from the riverbed, which again cannot be seen by just by looking at the river from the ground. And this water coming from these locations are very unique, and they are different in terms of water chemistry and also temperature regime compared to the stream water. And then what we found is the locations where the salmon, they spawn, they lay eggs in cold winter period match exactly with the locations of these groundwater places. Okay. So which tells us that, conservation of the groundwater system that provides a good habitat for salmon is very much important, critically important, probably for maintaining their winter population. Right. So here's another important message from me. Publishing papers is a necessity to survive as a scientist, as our professors told me repeatedly in the past. But I'm increasingly recognize the importance of practicing our cutting-edge information, scientific knowledge to the public. Right? So there are many ways, But one way of doing that is providing environmental educations to the public. Okay, that way we can teach what is going on in our surrounding environment very effectively. So in my lab, at least, I urge most of my graduate students to participate in those kind of activities as much as possible and share the knowledge with the general public. In conclusion, I'd like to stress 3 points regarding the management of river systems for future. Right? First of all, we should respect nature. Nature, rivers, they know how they can support a variety of organisms. So we should set up the system in which rivers can do what they want to do as much as possible. And also, secondly, protecting, conserving everything is impossible and impractical. So we should prioritize our choice. So try to find out what is important compared to the others so we can do a better job. And at the end, science can help us. Okay? There's a still large gap in our knowledge about how the river system works. So that needs to be filled up. So we need to continue, carry on our research. So if you are interested in doing this kind of work, I welcome you all warmly to join our team at the Hokkaido University. Thank you very much.
Okay, so the Q&A session is going to begin now. Can I just invite the speakers back onto the stage, please? Can you give them a round of applause? There we go. We've had quite a few questions from the audience come in, so thank you very much for that. I'll start with a question that's come from the audience for Dr. Kimura. In terms of the okay, so how safe is the water treated by MBR for drinking, like heavy metals and organisms and things like that?
And thank you for the questions. And the membrane that we use for the membrane bioreactor is tight enough to completely reject the microorganisms. So we can assume the water that is free from bacteria, but well, when it comes to the heavy metals, I need to say MBR is not enough. So if heavy metal is the concern, then we need to apply other process to remove the heavy metals.
I see. In terms of the end result, you're expecting it to be drinking water again, is that correct? I mean, a lot of people sort of, in terms of what's called recycled water, perhaps turn their nose off because it is perhaps, I mean, it might be 100% pure, but have you looked at the sort of that aspect of people wanting to be able to drink the actual water?
Sorry, my explanation was not enough in my presentation, but to have the drinkable water from wastewater, well, I would say MBR is not enough. We need to add additional, much more tight membrane process. We call that reverse osmosis. And the reverse osmosis membrane process can remove, I would say, everything from water, including, well, sodium, very small ions. So actually, maybe you know that the reverse osmosis is used for the desalination from seawater. This process also can be used for the wastewater reclamation, but for the treatment of the reverse osmosis, for the wastewater treatment, first we need to, well, purify the wastewater at some grade. For this purpose, MBR is perfect. So we call that the kind of hybrid membrane process combined with the MBR and reverse osmosis. And this is actually what used in Singapore's case. So by combination of the MBR or reverse osmosis, well, I would say you can produce a drinkable water from wastewater. And I can assure the safety.
I see. Just a question. I mean, you've mentioned Singapore. are there any other case studies? This is a question from the audience as well. How can can it be available in third world countries?
Good question. At present, I would say no, because of the high cost. However, now what we are seeing is the rapid declining of the both initial and operational cost of the membrane process. So I hope in the near future it might be available for the third countries, third world.
Okay, thank you very much. We've got quite a few questions here to get through. I'll turn over to Dr. Fortunato now. Here is a question. Why the ocean at the lower latitude showed lower pH because of human impact in the area?
Thanks for the questions. Well, oceans, it could be because of the concentration of people there, but also it has to do with the currents that, the water. The ocean is really an universal, so what you dump in here, it may show, in several years, say, on the Caribbean side, which, it's pretty far away from here. But you can also have impacts like temperature will also, and at lower latitudes, water is warmer. So with temperature, higher temperature, the solubility of the ions increases. So that could also be one of the reasons why you have lower pH on lower latitudes. We really don't know. Oceans are so old, much older than we are, but it's not our environment. So in order to go there, you saw the little movie when reading the rivers, you need special equipment. If you go to the ocean, you increase that equipment. So it's difficult to study oceans, and there's a lot that we don't know, and that's one more reason for concern, is that things are disappearing that we don't even have a clue what they are.
This question is perhaps from a concerned member of the audience. Is the level of acidity harmful enough to humans swimming in the ocean at the moment?
No, no.
No.
Probably it will never be, hopefully, because if we the little example I gave you with the vinegar and the eggshell was just for you to have a better understanding of what is going on with skeletons. It's still a long process. It's not from a minute to the next one, so it's not that you jump in the ocean and you start having holes on your body. When that happens, we will not be here, for sure, because then everything else had been gone from the world. But we are getting to a dangerous situation.
Okay, thank you very much. And our first speaker of the day was Negishi Sensei. Now, there's a question here. What was your latest opportunity in which you practiced your knowledge? I think you were basically, referring a lot to how you go out in the field a lot and read the sea. Read the river, sorry.
You mean occasions in which I practice my knowledge? I had a lecture. It's not a lecture, but in the middle of Hokkaido, there's juniors or elementary schools where the nature is very rich. It's called Shimukapu village, and there we provided environmental program it's about 1 month ago with the students, and there we learned about what the freshwater fish eats, and then how the environmental conditions surrounding area can affect the habitat for fish, and that's what we taught to the elementary school kids over there. So that's the latest opportunity for me. Yes.
Another question that came through is a local sort of concern about Toyohira River. You mentioned you were researching salmon population in that river. What else have you found out? I mean, it goes right through the center of Sapporo. Is it a healthy river?
Water quality wise, it's good. It's very clean water, but The problem is right now is because of the dam in upstream area again, and rivers need a sediment coming from the upstream area to support a riverbed to be at a certain level, elevation. But because of the dam, no sediment is coming from the upstream area. So humans, we have to put the artificial structures to artificially maintain the level of riverbed elevation. And thinks it's not going to be better at all. So in like few decades, we're going to have more serious problems that I can say for sure. But we don't know what to do with that yet. So that's another concern.
That's another one. Okay, and perhaps the last question, because we have to move on. To join your research, should we be able to swim well?
Yes. Yeah, I'm a good swimmer.
It's in here. So, there you go. Okay. Well, that concludes the session. We'll see you here back at 3:30 sharp. Could you please make sure that you're in your seat by 3:25? I know that only gives us a short time, but yeah, thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to GiFT. I would like to explain that all the speakers you are about to hear will be teaching on a brand new modern Japanese studies program, which is beginning next year on October as foundation. The first year intake for the degree is due to commence the following spring semester 2015. We are very excited about this program. Being the first of its kind in Japan, it is bachelor's degree program, expands 4 years, and offers so much. The first, intensive study of the Japanese language. The students should be completely fluent on graduation. Second, the study of Japan in 4 main disciplines: history, culture studies, sociology, and political economy. Third, co-learning with Japanese students. Students will take many classes with their Japanese peers. Fourth, the curriculum that allows students to discover their Japan from the unique and multicultural vantage point of this great island of Hokkaido. We cannot wait to begin this brand new program and welcome the best and brightest students into the first intake. Well, with that, let us begin GiFT. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for coming today and for staying for the second session. My name is Emma Cook. I'm a social anthropologist, now in the International Centre. So my talk today is titled Creating Unsustainable Lives, Effects of Gender Norms on Male Freeters. Okay, so in the past 20 years, we've seen a significant increase in irregular work conditions in Japan. So for example, we now know that as of 2012, 38.2% of workers are in the irregular employment sector. Now this is a significant increase. It's actually labelled the feminization of labour, and is something that is happening around the world in post-industrial countries, not just in Japan. So what we see, although it's called the feminization of labour, part of the reason why it's called this is because of the increase in male workers in what has traditionally been a very female-dominated sector. So since 1990, we see that male workers in this kind of sector were at only about 9%, and as of 2012, 2013, it's now roughly 20% of men in this kind of work. Okay, so my research specifically, it's anthropological research. It deals with ethnographic methods, and it really focuses on a topic of worker called Freeter. Now, a Freeter, at its simplest, is someone who is aged 15 to 34, who is not a housewife, not a student, and is working part-time or in arubaito-style jobs. Okay. Now, the term was created back in the 1980s at the height of the bubble economy. This was a time when jobs were very plentiful for young graduates. When the recession hit, when the bubble burst, companies really froze hiring of youth employment, or of new graduates. And this led to an increase in university graduates as Freeters. Now, after this, a moral panic happened, and now we can see that Freeters are basically discussed in two main ways. They are either lazy, irresponsible slackers, or they are victims of the current employment system and of changing school-to-work transitions. One of the things that is happening is, of course, they're part of the panic regarding pension and social welfare system. But recently, they've also been kind of called as a point of concern regarding the fall in marriage rates. Okay, you can actually see on the graph behind me that irregular workers tend to get married at a far lower rate than regular seishain employees. Okay. So, why? Well, of course, financial considerations often come up as being one of the main reasons. We'll talk a little bit about this today. But behind that is actually very normative ideas of gender that continue to construct employment in very gendered ways as well. Okay? So being a Freeter for a male particularly is said to say something very negative about his character. So really my talk today focuses on, well, how do gendered role expectations affect these male Freeters' abilities to create meaningful and sustainable livelihoods for themselves outside of the regular employment market? Just a note, all of my research on this has really taken place in Shizuoka Prefecture in Hamamatsu. It's a mid-sized industrial town, and it is a very conservative area of the country. So please do bear this in mind when I talk to you about my research findings on normative ideals of gender and how people are reacting. So in Hamamatsu, talking to both men and women, people very much continue to aspire to post-war, middle-class family ideals. Well, what is this? Well, the idea of the breadwinner husband and the part-time working housewife. So, of course, with this idea being extremely strong, it became very important in my research to find out, well, what did women think of today's young men? What did women think of young male Freeters? So let's go first to their ideas of today's young men. Well, overwhelmingly, this is what came up. Young men today are weak. You're why? So Akiko, who's 34, she said that they are mentally, emotionally weak. Seishin teki ni yowai. Okay. She said that when she gives them advice, they seem to get smaller. And for her, this is really representative of mental weakness. Ayumi talked about how young men today will quit jobs if they don't like them. And she compared men today to her father's generation who had no choice to do jobs because they were breadwinners. They didn't have the freedom to quit, she would say. And Saki, who is also 34, talked a lot about how young men today think it's okay not to gambaru, to do their best, or gaman, endure difficult situations. And again, so a lot of these comparisons were really between today's young men and their father's generation. Okay. So this brings me on to, well, what did they think of male Freeters then? Well, overwhelmingly, it was very negative. And again, they are mentally and emotionally weak, says Sayuki. I talked about how these young Freeters, male Freeters, are not doing things properly. They're not doing things chanto. Okay? If they quit jobs very easily, if they move around, then it's representative of how they're not able to do things properly. And Aya, a 30-year-old who was already married, talked a lot about how she would feel very embarrassed if she married a Freeter, especially if she had to tell people that her husband was a Freeter. She talked a lot about how he would feel inferior, hikeme, because she would be able to feed him, and that this would cause significant problems in their relationship. So what did women want? Well, women in Hamamatsu tended to have quite a long list of things that they wanted. So the ideal partners were someone who was reliable, mentally, emotionally strong, of course, this came up. Kind. This meant different things to different women. Older women talked about men being breadwinners as a form of kindness. Younger women talked about kindness in a much more kind of typical young way of, you know, taking them out for dinners and being nice to them. Yeah. Decisive. And decisive included not asking the women for advice. They wanted men to be able to make decisions when a decision needed to be made. They also wanted a guy to be communicative, so don't ask advice but be communicative. They wanted a man to be steady and trustworthy, and of course responsible. And this included financial responsibility. Okay. So why? Why did women have this big long list? Why did women still want men to be breadwinners? Well, of course, there are definite financial and structural constraints in the labor market for women in Japan still. Women in Hamamatsu who were even highly educated with career track jobs generally expected to quit when they had their first child. And many said to me that their companies would expect them to quit when they had their first child. So of course, this definitely affects what they want and need in a marital relationship. Now, interestingly, it was female Freeters that were especially critical of the male counterparts. An example of Sumiko and Masao, who'd been together for 6 years. Sumiko basically talked a lot about how it was her dream to be a full-time housewife, and that it was not her responsibility to be a breadwinner. Masao, meanwhile, really felt that it would be okay for them both to keep working, plus he didn't really want the pressure of being a breadwinner, but for Sumiko this was off the table. So of course the pressure that male Freeters receive is partly the result of women's economic position. It's partly the result of expectations. But it's not always about money. So for example, Yoshio, a 33-year-old high school dropout, was dating a woman 5 years his senior who was a career woman who intended to stick with her job. But she refused to introduce him to her parents. Marriage was off the table because he was a Freeter. Again, this issue of embarrassment. So women's expectations really influence the construction of masculinities and the continuation of gender norms. So I've talked to you a lot about, well, what do women want? Well, you know, what did male Freeters think about marriage? What did they want about marriage? Nobu, a very talented artist who wanted to be an artist, really bemoaned the fact that he wouldn't be able to make enough money from art. Not only that, people stressed that it was not a sustainable livelihood. So he felt that with women's wages being lower, there was no way he could be an artist and marry at the same time. Takeshi, meanwhile, really did kind of feel that he should be the main breadwinner. He wanted that role. He felt it was a duty and an obligation of him. He wanted his wife only to work until they had children. So of course, these men are also very invested in this ideal of men as breadwinners as well. Now, for some, this kind of pressure really pushed them to push away from marriage. And Hideo, a 34-year-old, basically talked about how he didn't want to always have to think about someone else. He didn't want these pressures. That's marriage, so it's not for me. And he's still unmarried at 39, 40 years old now. So we have two issues coming up, really, on the gender divide. We've got male Freeters who wanted to marry, but they were very worried about money. They felt that they couldn't stay a Freeter and get married as well. They couldn't have their cake and eat it. Women, meanwhile, were not prepared to marry Freeters because of money, but also because of the status of a Freeter. That working as a male Freeter says something very negative about his character. And so, despite the fact that the irregular labour market could be a place where people start to challenge and change gender role expectations, this is really not happening in places like Hamamatsu, because both women and men continue to enforce these post-war gender role expectations. And so I would like to invite all of you to consider not just the case of Hamamatsu, but in other places in Japan and elsewhere, how changing gender norms could help people create sustainable, meaningful lives for themselves outside of normative ideals of working. Thank you very much for your time today.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Philip Seaton. Today I'm going to be talking about tiger dramas and tourism. Has anybody ever visited a film location? Has anybody ever visited Universal Studios, Disneyland, or another place linked to film? If so, then you have been a film tourist, someone who has wholly or partially been influenced to visit a place because of film. I am involved in a research project into content tourism. Now, this is a really exciting theoretical development that has been developed in Japan by Japanese scholars, and it's related to film tourism. Basically, content refers to the narratives, characters, locations, music, and other creative elements that appear in films. And content tourism is how these elements stimulate people to travel. But because this talk is being given as part of Sustainability Weeks, I also want to think of content tourism in terms of its sustainability. Now, UNESCO defines sustainable tourism as tourism that respects both local people and the traveller, cultural heritage, and the environment. But we can also think of sustainability in an economic sense. Is a tourism site related to film economically sustainable in the long run? Now, this gives a good example of the problem. This is a film location site in Yubari, in the center of Hokkaido. It is the location for a film called The Yellow Handkerchief of Happiness, which was very popular when it came out in 1977. But how long can a site like this maintain its popularity once the popularity of the film has passed? But today I'm going to think about historical tourism as a form of sustainable content tourism. I'm going to do this by looking at a few TV dramas with historical characters and the tourism booms created by them. I'm going to be looking at two tiger dramas, Shinsengumi, broadcast in 2004, and Ryomaden, broadcast in 2010. Now, these are flagship historical dramas broadcast on NHK. They focus on a hero, a main character, and the dramas continue basically for an entire year. These dramas typically trigger a large tourism boom to the locations featured in the drama. Now, this graphic shows the extent of those tourism booms in the locations where dramas have been set since 2003. Now, the two dramas that I'll be talking about today are in these two locations, and as you can see, there's a very significant economic impact in these places. Now, you'll notice that there's actually two figures listed there. The figures in the brackets are higher than the first figures, and that's because the Bank of Japan, who wrote these estimates, they were forced to revise upwards their estimates of the tourism boom based on the large number of people who were visiting, having seen the drama, presumably. Now, it's not only in terms of their economic impacts that these two dramas are a good comparison. Both are set in the Bakumatsu period. Bakumatsu is 1853 to 68. They both have lots of locations in Kyoto, and they both feature very popular heroes of this period. In Shinsengumi, there was Hijikata Toshizo, who, as you can see from the photo there, is a sort of dashing figure of a samurai man, and has lots of particularly female fans these days. And on the right, Sakamoto Ryoma, who is one of the great visionaries of this period. So let's go to our first location, Kyoto. In the 1860s, Kyoto was the scene of a violent power struggle between the defenders of the existing order, the Tokugawa shogunate, and those who wanted to overthrow the shogunate and introduce a new era of modernization to Japan. Hijikata Toshizo was part of the Shinsengumi, which was a corps created to protect the shogun on his trip to Kyoto in 1863. Meanwhile, Sakamoto Ryoma was one of the shishi, the men of high principles, as they were known, who were actively campaigning against the Tokugawa shogunate at this time in Kyoto. Now, this is the Ryozen Museum of History in Kyoto, and this is me being a typical drama tourist in Shinsengumi costume, having my photograph taken between a picture of Hijikata and Sakamoto Ryoma. Now, I show this picture mainly to illustrate that these two historical figures are extremely important characters in the context of this museum's exhibits, which helps to explain this data. These are the visitor numbers to the Ryozen Museum of History from 2000 up to 2011. Now, if you look in 2004, you can see a very large increase in the number of visitors coinciding with the broadcast of the Shinsengumi drama. In 2010, we have a similar peak in tourist numbers that coincides with the broadcast of Ryomaden about Sakamoto. Notice also how in the year before the peak there's a sort of lead-in, and that's because NHK announces the topic of its drama 18 months in advance, and then people who are interested in learning a bit more about the drama the following year, they will head to the museum. There's also a very steep drop-off in the year after the drama is broadcast, which shows that these dramas produce a very strong boost, but it's only a temporary boost to the tourism industry. It's not only at this museum that we've been able to see this kind of pattern. At the Mibudera Temple in Kyoto, which was the base for the Shinsengumi in the early 1860s, and which contains the graves of a number of Shinsengumi members, I asked the staff about the tourist levels in 2004. They said there were busloads of tourists. But then the following year, the buses stopped coming and visitor levels returned to normal. Let's now move away from Kyoto and go to Hino. This is in Tokyo, it's in western Tokyo, and it's a very important site related to the Shinsengumi. A number of the Shinsengumi members came from this city, including Hijikata Toshizo. But there were a number of reasons why this particular site did not gain a large amount of revenue or economic boost from the tourism boom. Let's have a look why. First of all, Hino is situated very close to the center of Tokyo. It's within easy commuting distance. What this means in practical tourism terms is that the city was not able to attract lots of overnight tourists. Overnight tourists are the key to a really vibrant tourism sector. People spend a lot more money when they stay the night in a hotel compared to when they're just on a day trip. A second reason is the type of sites that we find in Hino. These are two small museums, the Hijikata Toshizo Museum and the Inoue Genzaburo Museum. Now, these museums are both very significant for Shinsengumi fans because they're run by the descendants of the Shinsengumi members, but they're only open a few days a month, and the entrance fee is very nominal, which means that these museums really aren't being run for any kind of financial motives. They're really about displaying family heirlooms. And here's the major museum in Hino about the Shinsengumi, the home of the Shinsengumi Historical Museum. But this particular museum was only opened in 2005, the year after the drama was broadcast, so it wasn't able to take advantage of the drama. In any case, there would be negligible economic benefits for the city for this particular museum. The reason is that it's had about 10,000 visitors per year since it's opened, and that's they're charging 200 yen in entrance fees. That's not enough to pay one full-time member of staff. What we effectively have in Hino is the local authorities subsidizing the tourism industry so that they can generate a sense of local identity, history, and pride. So, I want to think about tiger drama booms within a sustainable tourism strategy. And this really leads me to 5 conclusions. The first is that stories and characters from Japanese history are often highly sustainable tourist resources, particularly in contrast to the stories and narratives that we find in fictional film. This is because the characters are an established part of Japanese history and culture, and so their stories keep on coming up again and again. Therefore, there are repeated booms as people go back to these sites again. But even when we do have these sites that can take advantage of existing booms, they should base their business model on the visitor numbers in ordinary years. It's very risky to try and build your business model using peak year data. But at the same time, these locations, they should be very ready to take advantage of any booms that do come their way. They can really help to get the tourist site through the leaner years, as it were. Also, these locations should encourage their visitors to stay overnight. When you have people staying in hotels and buying dinner in the evening, that's when you can really start to make a large profit out of a tourism sector. But finally, contents tourism should be integrated into a broader tourism strategy. There are very few people who go to a location simply to visit a film tourism site. They typically like to have a more diverse experience. So the more that a location with prime historical contents can diversify its tourism industry, the better it is for that locality. There's a lot of attention these days on Japanese popular culture. The Japanese government has its Cool Japan strategy. But I'd like to focus on contents tourism as one of the key growth areas for Japanese tourism in the coming years. And the reason for, I think one of the results is going to be that when people visit Japan, they're going to be as interested in visiting a manga site or a history site as they are of going to a temple or getting some local food. So this is really one of the real growth areas in not only academia, but also in terms of tourism strategy for the next decade or two. And I will be continuing this research with colleagues of mine in the Center for Advanced Tourism Studies and elsewhere at Hokkaido University. And in particular, when people start coming and studying on the Modern Japanese Studies program, I'll be really looking forward to hearing how our students go off around the country and visit sites related to their interests, their contents interests. Thank you very much.
I'm Susanne Kleen, and I would like to talk about some emerging youth in contemporary Japan. I'd like to open up with a statement that is, can you go back? I'm sorry, I pushed. Rather than working in a big company in the city, we've chosen to do a work that contributes to the region and enjoy a life together with our local friends. Eat safe and delicious food, earn a stable income and live happily with our families." End of quote. So I'm going to talk about people in their 20s and 30s who choose to relocate from urban areas to the countryside in search for more purpose in life and a greater life quality. Depopulation is actually the norm across rural and small-town municipalities in Japan, but recently, and this has been enforced by the Great East Japan earthquake in 2011, some remote locations have actually attracted young migrants. For example, there's a very famous case in Shimane Prefecture in Western Japan. We have a remote island called Ama Town, and this place has only 2,400 residents, but has managed to attract more than 200 migrants, mostly in the 20s and 30s, from urban areas recently. We have also similarly in Tokamachi City in Niigata Prefecture an influx of young and quite well-educated migrants in recent years. And Ishinomaki City in Miyagi Prefecture, which is one of the most badly afflicted areas by the disaster in 2011, has had a record number of volunteers, some of who have decided to stay on or commute between Tokyo and Ishinomaki. There's a similar story going on in Rikuzen Takata City in Iwate Prefecture. So you can see that this phenomenon is happening all over Japan. So I'd like to talk about lifestyle migration today. That is migration that is spurred by non-economic factors mostly. A characteristic of this migration style is ephemerality. That is, people are looking for a better life, a better work-life balance. They're trying to achieve non-material affluence and a meaningful life in general. So if they cannot achieve this boost in life quality, they tend to move on to other places. Apart from that, obviously self-realization and the aim, aspiration for purpose in life, ikigai in Japanese, is quite a big factor here. So my research project is qualitative in nature. I usually refer to interviews and participant observation, sanyo kansatsu in Japanese. That is basically I go out to places, talk to people, try to join in activities in order to get a sense of what values and lifestyles people have. This study focuses on migrants between 20 and 40 in Shimane Prefecture, Niigata, Miyagi and Iwate Prefecture. And I've focused on people between 20 and 40. Previous studies in lifestyle migration have mostly focused on people after finishing work and retiring and moving to rural areas. So the innovative feature of this study is first of all this young age group, and also I actually try to research people all across Japan. So it's quite a big sample. I've talked to 30 people in depth now. So I'd like to share two case studies with you to give you an insight why people choose to relocate. First, I'm going to talk about Abe Hiroshi, who is in his mid-30s, and he's a graduate from the Department of Engineering, Kyoto University. He used to work for a well-known car manufacturer in Aichi Prefecture before deciding to abandon his conventional employment and relocate to Ama Town, the remote island I mentioned before. He has set up a company with a couple of other migrants in the 20s and 30s, a group called Meguri no Wa. And this group is active mainly in three areas: regional revitalization, education, and media. So the idea is for the company to make a social contribution by boosting the local confidence in the attractions and strong points of that island and hometown. But at the same time, they also hope to attract non-local migrants to the area, both as visitors but also as long-term migrants. And Abe's heightened sense of life satisfaction can be seen from this statement. Quote, "Right now, I enjoy every day so much I cannot describe it." End of quote. So although Abe has relocated to this remote island, he has been moving around both in physical terms but also in virtual terms, because he makes frequent trips throughout Japan to talk about his activities and network with other groups, but also does he have a very strong presence on the internet, using social media and to share his experiences and network with other people with similar concerns. The second case I'd like to talk about here is Tada Tomoyoshi, who is a graduate also from Kyoto University, Faculty of Letters. He used to work as a company employee in Osaka in finance consulting for several years. And then in 2008, the Lehman shock happened, and he decided to abandon conventional employment and move to Tokumachi City in Niigata Prefecture with his family. He's now doing something completely different. That is, he's now engaging in organic farming and regional revitalization. So we can say that on the one hand, he's engaging in manual labor in a very classic sense, but at the same time, he also has a very strong internet presence. Apart from his Facebook account, he writes a regular blog about his activities in the small mountain village called Iketani, where he has moved to. And we could say that his lifestyle is actually going beyond the classic urban and rural divide. So he's moving around both in physical but also in a virtual dimension by using social media a lot. So we can say there's an increased interest in the good life in Japanese contemporary society, and this has been enforced by the disaster in 2011. We also have a trend towards clusters and networks. That is, people with similar values tend to get together and share their experiences. We also have lifestyles beyond the urban and rural divide. So people tend to move to and fro, and there's no clear-cut divide anymore. So we could actually talk about rural spaces in a novel manner. That is, previous research has focused on rural areas as an open category. That is a place where you can engage in social experiments. There's also been the term post-productivist countryside. So you have countryside being assigned a new meaning after classical manual labor. And we also have the notion radical rurality. Personally, I would like to call for envisioning countryside not as a polarized opposite to urban areas, but I'd like to see it as a coexistence with urban areas. Because if you look at these cases of migrants, they're moving a lot between spaces, and there's no clear-cut division anymore. Another innovative feature of this study is that I bring in the concept of subjective well-being into this lifestyle migration. So obviously migrants have their personal preferences and lifestyle choices that have been a key factor in shaping the decision to relocate. But on the other hand, the interpersonal elements play a big role in their well-being. So obviously, positive human relations, having a network with peers and other people makes a big difference, apart from the physical and existential dimension of well-being. So, and this brings us to this network factor I've referred to before. That is, a lot of these migrants actually have kind of neo-tribal elements getting together in informal networks. They share accommodation, they share offices, and they also engage in barter in order to make up for the lack of disposable cash, because they abandoned previous conventional employment. So we could say that contractual groups in the classical meaning, such as companies, have been replaced by effectual tribes, and they tend to be very unstable and temporary in nature. And also, they tend to be not bound by geography. That is, people have nomad lifestyles, and they also rely heavily on social media, as I mentioned before. So I would like to argue that doing fieldwork as a researcher with a variety of people and in a variety of places also constitutes a source of ikigai, or purpose in life. Because in order to get valuable data, you obviously need to establish a relation of trust with interviewees. And this in turn calls for intensive interaction with many various different actors. So this is a picture from fieldwork I did with disaster volunteers in Rikuzen Takata, Iwate Prefecture, in the summer of 2012. I'd like to argue that well-being, subjective well-being, is made up of 3 factors. Good life quality, and this actually is a picture from my favorite restaurant in Kesenuma, a Japanese fish restaurant. Second, obviously, enthusiasm for work. That is, doing a work that you personally deem meaningful. Apart from, and this obviously exceeds economic factors. And also, last but not least, positive human relations. So what is my message to potential students now? I'd like to invite you to join us at Hokkaido University in doing fascinating fieldwork in various regions across Japan. I personally believe that sustainable research requires human growth, and this you can achieve by interacting with a variety of actors. I'd like to invite you to study at the most beautiful campus in Japan, but at the same time I'd like to encourage you to get out to other places beyond university, because I'd like to ask you to keep in mind that academia may be really inspiring and exciting, but it's only a very small part of this world. Thank you very much.
Like a great program. If only I was 17 again and in high school. We'll just get the 3 speakers back on stage for the second session. Give them a round of applause. Thank you. Okay, I'll do it in order this time, maybe. Starting with Dr. Cook, really great presentation. A lot of questions have come in. When you think of the word Freeter, it actually came from the word free, right?
Yeah, it's a combination of, thank you. It's a combination of a German word and an English word, basically. Yeah.
And how did the process go from it having a positive connotation to one that was sort of negative? And do many Freeters these days self-identify themselves as, watashi wa Freeter desu, or not?
Right, it's a great question. Basically, when it was created in the 1980s, it was set up by the head of, the category was created by the head of a part-time employment magazine. And so he was really trying to kind of make it very popular. Now, in the 1980s, taking a little bit of time out to enjoy yourself, find yourself, was not considered particularly risky. Once the recession hit, companies did begin to cut back on hiring of youth. And one of the repercussions of that was that a larger number of graduates from universities ended up being unable to get into the expected middle-class full-time employment and ended up as Freeters. And this really sparked a moral panic. And this is really where some of the ideas of, well, they're lazy, they should just try harder and find a job come from. And, well, actually, no, they're actually victims of these different transitions. During my research, yes, people did identify as a Freeter. Those tended to be people who, a little bit like Dr. Klein's subjects, were much more invested in trying to become entrepreneurs and create different lifestyles for themselves. And so they used it kind of as a badge of, yes, I'm different. Others who were a little bit more worried about their situations were much more reticent about using it publicly.
This is a question, obviously most of them are questions from the audience. Did you find any relationship in your research between the notion of Freeters and also, I think the question relates to maybe a recent article which I read as well about young people choosing celibacy, or a whole, a large population of the youth of Japan being disinterested in sex.
No, I didn't find this crossover, and actually I'm very skeptical of these kinds of claims that talk about young people now not having sex anymore. I think if you look at statistics that come out of, for example, America, of young people who are not dating or not marrying or not having sex, actually those statistics are higher than in Japan. So there's a lot of confusion between, well, are they having sex during dating, are they, et cetera, et cetera. So I think in a way it's just yet another media moral panic about the youth of today not reproducing in the way that they should be to save the nation from the declining birth rate. In my case, male Freeters were in relationships, female Freeters were in relationships. Sustaining dating relationships was not necessarily an issue. It was really the issue of what happens when you want to solidify it into marriage, what happens when those roles begin to change.
And I think the last, we've got time for one more question. Were Freeters you talked to mentally and emotionally unstable?
That's a great question. No, well, maybe a couple were mentally, emotionally unstable. The vast majority were really self-directed individuals who were trying against kind of the social pressures around them in their neighborhoods, from their parents, from peers who were being more normative, to make a success in the way that they wanted to make a success. And I really saw that once they started to hit the late 20s, those pressures just began to pile up. And that's when they started to make these difficult decisions of whether they would give it up and try and find stable work and live a normative life, or whether they would just carve ahead regardless and see where the chips fell.
Well, thank you very much. The second speaker was Dr. Philip Seaton. Basically, our first question for Dr. Seaton is, are there examples of successful models in the UK of sustainable tourism? I know I've always wanted to visit Fawlty Towers as the hotel.
So you mean, contents tourism with a sort of UK base. I mean, there are various examples of contents tourism. It's not called contents tourism in the UK yet. We'll get there eventually. But film tourism and places like the locations of Coronation Street, any of the long-running dramas in the UK have generated tourism industries. The Harry Potter films have also generated quite a lot of tourism within the UK.
Okay. There was another example. I can't remember the name of it, but it was it's a place in Furano, which was a famous. What's the name of the drama?
Kita no Kunikara, from a northern country.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. I should know that. Do you have the numbers of the sustainable? How sustainable is that, and how much? In terms of the already existing attractions of Furano, has that sort of helped that particular location to sustain tourist numbers?
I haven't gone into the fine data of the Furano case study, but what I would say is that Furano is a good example of what I talked about as being an integrated tourism sector. I mean, within Furano, you've got the lavender fields, you've got the cheese factories, you've got the film locations, and you've got the beautiful views from the tops of the mountains. You put it all together, and that's the sort of integrated tourism sector that can really work. I mean, I've been around all of the Furano sites, and it's the same with the drama museum, the Shinzen-gumi Museum in Hino. I mean, they're not charging a huge amount of money to go in, so they're not going to be making huge profits at any individual site. But if you provide enough in an individual locality to keep people there for 1, 2, 3 nights, then the hotels are cashing in, and their tax money then helps to give the local government the money to subsidize the rest of the tourism sector. And it's a synergetic relationship between the content sites and the other parts of the tourism industry.
Excellent. And another question, what is your next target or theme to study regarding modern Japanese history? Because that's your specialty.
Yeah, at the moment, I've come via World War II history and memory. What I'm going towards at the moment is a history and study of memory of the Boshin War. In 2018, 2019, we're going to have the 150th anniversary of the Boshin War. This is the war that culminated the Bakumatsu period that I referred to in my talk, and I'm hoping to do a survey of all of the major sites in the Boshin War, and see how tourism and popular culture have represented that war 150 years ago, and how that relates to popular consciousness of the period.
Great. And lastly, our third speaker, Dr. Kleen. Question here. Do only men question the mainstream lifestyle? How much of your data did you actually research? The same sort of phenomenon with women doing that sort of thing in Japan.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's true that it's mostly male informants I met during my fieldwork across Japan. I would say that it's perhaps 1/4 are women and the rest are male. So it's heavily, I would say lifestyle migration is heavily dominated by males. And this, in turn, I think is very much related to the topics Emma talked about today. I think that men probably have an easier time getting out of these fixed notions about gender norms and roles, and that's why they have an easier time also trying to break out of conventional lifestyles and work patterns. So I think I would expect that in the future there may be more women, yes. So it's just a matter of time, I guess.
A question about social media and the role it plays. Is social media a major constitute for allowing this breakdown between rural and urban norms?
Well, I think it helps, but I think there's also other ways of breaking up this divide. I think you can just engage in a variety of networks. And I guess, in a way, I also met some migrants who consciously contested the meaningfulness of Facebook and all these media, and actually said they prefer not to use those and rather keep physical connections, which also makes sense, I think.
So the majority of the research or the people that you were studying sort of went away from social media as well. Is that?
No, I would say that's more the exception, but there are some who actually actively question the meaningfulness of
Of
relying on social media. So I would say I think there's quite a lot of people who like to use this social media, and I think it's also related to certain professions. For example, I did fieldwork with a network consisting of a lot of architects. So I think there are some professions that have a kind of liking for certain ways of communication. So and also architecture is also very much male dominated in Japan still. So I think that's also related.
And lastly, do you think the migration of young people affects economic growth? Is there what sort of numbers are we talking about in Japan that actually do this?
Yeah, it's a very difficult question because you cannot get any official numbers from the local offices because it's a privacy problem. So I have not actually found a solution yet how to get ready, real convincing numbers and facts and figures on that. But I would just like to say that it's a vanguard of lifestyle migration to come. So I think it's a growing trend, but the numbers are quite small. As I said, this Ama Island has more than 200 migrants, which is of course quite big in terms of dimension compared to the population number. They only have 2,400 residents. But I think I can see that across Japan there is, we can find these migrants. So I would definitely say that it's a trend, but it will take a few years to actually grow into a phenomenon. But there have actually been some articles about it, for example, in the Financial Times and other papers.
Okay, great. Ladies and gentlemen, please thank our three speakers today. Basically, these three academics are going to be teaching on the Modern Japanese Studies program, which we've introduced via a video before. We've got Dr. Philip Seaton here. He's the course co-convener, and he's just going to give us a brief outline of exactly what the course entails.
Okay, thank you very much. The Modern Japanese Studies program, well, I'm just really excited to be part of it. It's a brand new venture. We've been able to build the whole program from scratch. So what this means is that we've got a program put together with a real focus on what we hope young people who are interested in Japan in countries across the world are going to want to learn about. You've heard from the three presentations today that there's a real sort of youth focus, a real energy about the type of curriculum content that we're hoping to put together. At the same time, it's going to be tough. It's going to be rigorous. We are aiming for the most rigorous Japanese language training program in Japan at university level. We're also aiming for our students to be fully capable of getting into classes taught in Japanese by their third and fourth years, so that they can take advantage of all of the excellent research and teaching that goes on across the university, and not simply from the team that we've put together, of whom a few are here sitting in front of you. But our website is there behind us. www.hokkaido.ac.jp/mjsp. Please do take a look at the website for more details.
No, it sounds great. Best of luck with the course. Okay, so that basically concludes our session. I'm just going to ask Vice President Ueda back on the stage for some closing remarks. Thank you so much.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our gift for this year, and I hope you enjoyed as much as I did. And we are looking forward and waiting for you to join us in your future. I thank you again for coming, and we will see you next year at GiFT 2014.